Hi, my name is Vesa Juvonen, and I work as a principal consultant in Microsoft Corporation. In this module, we'll cover the overview of the SharePoint development platform. We'll first cover the new key changes of the environment, functionalities, and capabilities for developers. There's a lot of new functionalities and possibilities, and within this overview presentation, we'll cover different functionalities in high level. In the following section, we'll have a short introduction on the new developer tools and their capabilities. After that, we'll cover the key changes on the platform concerning scripting. In SharePoint 2010, we have a new capability to use PowerShell as our primary scripting technology. We also provide base classes to enable easy development of custom commandlets. As the final topic in this presentation, we'll cover the key changes on authentication and authorization point of view. SharePoint 2010 supports claims-based authentication, which gives us more flexibility on user identity handling. In this section, we'll concentrate on the development-oriented areas of this topic. So let's start by covering the new options from an environmental point of view and also concentrate on the new capabilities of the platform. Looking back to 2007 version, we had different flavors of the SharePoint. We had the Windows SharePoint Server, also known as WSS, and Microsoft Office SharePoint Server, also known as MOS. WSS provided the platform-level capabilities like site, workspace provisioning engine, and out-of-the-box collaboration services. MOS provided additional capabilities over the WSS like user profiles, enhanced search, WCM, BDC, Access services, and form services. From the platform point of view, we could either use 32 or 64-bit Windows Server 2003 or 2008 operating systems. IIS was either version 6.0 or 7.0, and the implementation of the WSS and MOS was based on basically .NET 3.0, meaning that the key concept or key ASP.NET components were from .NET 2.0 and Workflow Foundation components from 3.0, which can be considered as an extension to .NET Framework 2.0. SharePoint Server 2010 is the next version of the SharePoint technology stack. There will be 3 different SKUs for SharePoint Server 2010. These SKUs are the following: SharePoint Server, SharePoint Enterprise Server, SharePoint Standard, and Microsoft SharePoint Foundation. Microsoft SharePoint Foundation is the replacement of the WSS, and the SharePoint 2010 servers are replacement of the MOS. SharePoint 2010 server runs only in 64-bit operating systems. This is different from the MOS 2007 and WSS 3.0, which ran either in 32 or 64-bit operating systems. SharePoint 2010 Server is the first version of the product that supports installation also to client OS for development. The supported client operating systems includes 64-bit versions of Windows 7 and Windows Vista Service Pack 2. Note, though, that client operating systems are only supported as the development environment usage. You shouldn't be using the Windows 7 or Windows Vista SP2 within the production environment. Supported IIS version is now IIS 7.0, which provides more enhanced and improved platform for the ASP.NET pages. Note that due IIS 7, there's also a few changes for the HTTP module and HTTP handler registrations in the web configuration file. This means that if you have previously used, for example, SP Web Configuration Modification Object to register any of your changes to web configuration files, these registrations have to be updated. SharePoint itself has been implemented over .NET Framework 3.5 Service Pack 1, which also means that the Ajax and Silverlight modifications are natively supported by the platform. You could actually enable even though you could actually enable Ajax and Silverlight already back in 2007 version, but this required additional configurations. And in 2010, this is not anymore required. As already mentioned in the previous slide, we can run SharePoint 2010 also in client operating systems, which is a valid option for development environment setup. Like in 2007, SharePoint has to be installed locally on the computer where you develop your customizations, unless you only develop customizations which use remote access, like web services, WCF, client object model, or REST. As a development tool, you should be using Visual Studio 2010. Older versions of the Visual Studio also work as long as you reference the correct assemblies, but Visual Studio 2010 will increase the productivity of development and makes the development extremely straightforward. Other software to be installed on your computer depends on the project and tools you've been using as part of your development. These additional softwares include Office clients, browsers, and other tools which you might be using within your project. The value proposition of SharePoint 2010 can be split across 6 functional areas as seen in the slide, what is commonly also referred as the SharePoint pie. We have the sites, which covers the collaboration functionalities, for example the team sites and other advanced functionalities. We have the communities, which means the social networking functionalities and capabilities like blogs, wikis, user profiles, and obviously my sites. The search is also there, which is used for content discovery and connecting people. Content includes web content management, enterprise content management, records management, and so on. Composites basically means that we can build easy no-code applications, for example, with external data. And the insights basically means business intelligence and reporting capabilities, which we now have also improved within our platform. The SharePoint 2010 team site looks quite different from SharePoint 2007. There's a lot of changes on the user experience, which will improve the overall user experience of the SharePoint sites. Good examples of the changes are that the master page has been changed. Now the site action is on the left side. We can also edit the pages more easily, since the home page is actually a wiki page, and the URL has changed also a little bit. This wiki page model provides more flexibility on the layout and content management. Also, there's a lot of new lists and galleries created behind the scenes, which we can utilize as part of our site functionalities. There has been major changes to the most basic aspect of the SharePoint UI. Many of these changes have been designed to get rid of all of the unnecessary HTTP postbacks that are required when making updates in the browser. SharePoint 2010 has new core engine for processing pages based on ASP.NET Ajax and designed to deliver more kind of a Web 2.0 user experience. SharePoint 2010 adds the new server-side ribbon to create consistency with client-side ribbon added to the Office applications with the release of the Office 2007 system. The ribbon now provides a JavaScript-enabled paradigm where users can more easily move between the modes, for example, between the edit and read-only mode, without sending unnecessary postbacks to the web server. In-place editing is also the most obvious change that users will notice when they are moving from SharePoint 2007 to SharePoint 2010. Let's have a closer look on the new user interface and its capabilities which we can use. We'll walk through the key user experience changes in SharePoint 2010 from the editor's point of view.
So let's start our user interface demo by creating us a new team site. From central administration we can create new site collections from the application management, and there's a functionality called create site collections in a similar way as we did in 2007. Let's have the team as the title of our site collection, and let's create the site collection to intranet.contoso.com/site/team. we choose the theme site template to be used as the template for provisioning the actual site. Administrator as the username, and let's start the site creation. So at the moment SharePoint creates the actual site based on the theme site definition, so it activates features and functionalities to get us the theme site structure ready to be used. So we're actually able to show the new UI functionalities which are available. Site collection has been created, and let's open up the actual site. As you can see, the default theme template has been changed quite a lot, and there's a lot of new functionalities available. Of course, the key new change is obviously the ribbon, which is now located on the top of the page, and it provides different functionalities based on the status of the page. So if you start editing the actual page, we can see also the new enhanced HTML editing experience which is provided for us from the ribbon. And basically there's a lot of new functionalities available. For example, the live preview functionality, so if we want to change the font size, we can see all the time what is happening on the page before we actually make our decision for the actual font. Or, for example, the color change, we can see which kind of how the changes are actually applied in the HTML. Really good example of the new functionalities which are available. On the right side we currently have an image, and if we want to modify the particular image, you can see that there's context-aware functionalities available. So when I click the image, we have the picture tools available, and from here I can modify the actual image settings and different kind of settings which are available. Let's actually get rid of this image and replace that with a new image, just to demonstrate how simply we can edit the page. So from the Insert tab, let's add a new picture from computer. So we're going to upload a new picture from the pictures library, and I think I have here some image available which we can actually use. This is one of the new functionalities which is also available, so we don't have to first upload the image to some list or document library. We can do that on the same time we're actually adding the image on the site, which will obviously increase the productivity of editors. So I'm able to decide to which folder the actual image will be uploaded, and the default folder would be the site assets, and that's designed to be the folder or the library where this miscellaneous files which we used for the pages are uploaded. So let's add it to the library, and the big one is a totally fine name for our picture, and we have the picture available on the site. The picture size is a little bit too large, so we can actually edit that dynamically also within the site, and we can relatively easily modify the site UI and the settings. And for the other stuff which is new, we added a new image on the site. We can obviously add also new web parts and functionalities available wherever we want. And the key point with the web parts is, or the page editing, is the fact that the pages are actual wiki pages. So I can start writing anything on the site, and I can actually add web parts and content, this text, dynamic content, images or text or even videos directly in the same spaces where we actually have the web parts. So we don't have to necessarily first upload a content editor web part or an image web part, and then we are able to do or show the actual image or text. So we're able to edit and modify the site really easily. Let's add a new web part underneath the text here. So we show also the new web part functionality. So how do we are able to add these web parts to the page. And there's no pop-ups anymore, so we're able to see the different web parts which are available, and in this case let's add the announcements web part underneath that particular text. And the announcement list and the web part has been added. Let's save the changes, and we are committing a new version of this particular page to the pages library or site pages library. So even though this is a standard theme site, all of the editing and all of the pages, default pages within the site are stored within the pages library, which basically gives us a possibility, for example, to use versioning. So we're able to move back to previous version of the page, and we're able to also see the different changes which we have edited between the versions. So currently we have two different versions of the same page available, and one of the key improvements also in 2010 is the fact that now when we restore the previous status of the page, we are actually able to see that also the web parts which were added were removed from the page. So all of the web part versioning and modifications are also included in the page versioning functionality. One other thing which we wanted to show you in this first demo is the fact that there's this Fluent UI functionality or concept, which basically means that we can modify list settings functionalities directly from the front page of the site. And in this case it means the following. So if I select the shared documents, the ribbon will automatically refresh, and from the ribbon we can actually see the shared document lists functionalities. So I can actually upload new documents or modify the list settings directly from the front page of the site. In this case, let's upload a new document from the upload document functionality, and as you can see, we are not redirected or navigated to another URL. We will start the functionalities directly from within the page, which is using the dialog framework functionality. So we are in this kind of a model mode where we can actually work with the settings which we have and do the actual task which we want to do. In this case, let's upload one image on the page or on the library, and the image have been uploaded. So all the time when I was editing the page, I stayed at the front page of the site, even though we were updating or even editing the properties of a single item within the list libraries and so on. We remain on the same page and won't get lost within the site structure. And this will definitely improve the productivity of the end users of the SharePoint site.
Before we dive deeper in the developer capabilities, let's have a talk on different kind of applications developed over the SharePoint. The SharePoint is a flexible platform providing different capabilities for different kind of business requirements. So let's go through these options one by one. First one is building business collaboration applications. Since SharePoint provides powerful collaboration capabilities, it's quite a common option. This means that we are utilizing the SharePoint as the platform on building our customizations on top of it. This way, we can utilize the out-of-the-box capabilities efficiently and concentrate on the actual business logic changes which we are providing. Since SharePoint is often used as the primary platform for intranet, extranet, or internet portals, it's also quite logical to integrate informations from LOB systems. Especially with SharePoint 2010 and with the new business connectivity services, integration of LOB systems, as in line of business systems, is centralized and can be more easily managed and utilized as within your customizations. Quite often developers are asked to just enhance the existing out-of-the-box functionalities by adding a single web part solution which customizes certain areas of the user interface. Since we have a standard deployment model of deploying all of your customizations using solution packages, there's no difference on the deployment. Either you're developing a single web part or multiple web parts. And as a final area, we have these 3 different workloads, and one of the really common customizations is to enhance or modify their behavior by utilizing the available services. This is really a common reason to deploy some small or large customizations to the environment. Let's have a refresh on the key concepts and objects of the SharePoint farm. These objects are used when we are writing code which modifies or accesses information within the SharePoint farm. Basically, SharePoint farm consists from one or numerous servers which are part of the farm. We can access this information using the SP farm object, which provides interfaces to drill down further in farm elements. The SharePoint applications are exposed from the IIS of the web servers, which are part of the farm. Each web application has numerous site collections, which we can access also using the SP web modifications or in the end using the SP site objects. Each site collection consists from numerous sites, which basically means that we do have a root site, and there's always, well, not necessarily always, but there's quite often also subsites within the site collections. The sites consist from numerous lists which are used to store information within the SharePoint. There's numerous different types of lists like contact list, task list, and so on, and each of these lists have numerous fields and defined as list columns. Actual items stored within the list can be simply called as an item. One of the list type is a document library, which is a specialized list designed to store documents and optionally also folders. For all of these different elements of the SharePoint, we have obviously own object model, which we can use to modify their behavior. Basic concepts of the development code for SharePoint 2010 has not changed from the previous versions. The code example in this slide would work also as such in SharePoint 2010 environment due backward compatible object model. Key code is fully functional from 2007 to 2010 without even recompiling the code. There are, however, a few things to notice when we start developing customizations for the SharePoint. All code developed for the SharePoint has to be developed using .NET Framework 3.5, and the platform for the platform has to be selected either the 64-bit or any CPU. If we have a closer look on the actual code example on the slide, we can notice few familiar things already from 2007 version. The code, first of all, requires a reference to the Microsoft SharePoint DLL so that the Microsoft SharePoint namespace will be available. We can access the SharePoint site collection within the particular server using the SP object in a similar way as we did in 2007. SP site and SP web object are still implementing the iDisposable interface, and like for any .NET Framework component, implementing this interface will need to call dispose to clean up the memory after we end up manipulating using these objects. Many of the collections in SharePoint object model support for each enumerations, like within this example. Quite often, one of the things to notice when you start developing with Visual Studio 2010 is the fact that quite often you must launch the Visual Studio 2010 as an administrator to get debugging working correctly. Much of this has to do with the fact that identity behind the Windows process for Visual Studio 2010 needs sufficient rights to be able to attach and debug the IIS worker process. The easiest way to automate this is to enable the Run as an Administrator options for your shortcuts for the Visual Studio 2010. One of the really nice code monitoring solutions for developers into SharePoint 2010 is the developer dashboard. It shows diagnostic and performance-related statistics which can be used to analyze the execution of out-of-the-box and custom code on the page. The following statistics are, for example, visible. How long did the request actually run? What event handlers were fired? On which sequence these event handlers were fired? And what if there was any exceptions, these would be also visible within the developer dashboard. There's no built-in UI component which allows the user to enable or disable the developer dashboard. You can, however, create a simple console application which does the trick, or you can use the STS ADM or PowerShell to enable the developer dashboard within your environment. Note, though, that the developer dashboard enabling is actually a farm-scoped functionality. This basically means that if you enable the developer dashboard within your application, it will be enabled throughout the farm. This means that the developer dashboard shouldn't be necessarily used within the production environment, since the end users might get confused on the additional information which is available within the UI. Let's have a look on the SharePoint object model and how do we actually write our customizations against the SharePoint. We also will have a look on the different information available within the development dashboard and how we can switch the modes of the development dashboard.
So, in this demonstration we'll show how to access the SharePoint data using console application. As a simple demonstration, what do we need to consider when we are accessing the information within the SharePoint? Let's start by creating a new Visual Studio 2010 project. And there are a few things which we need to be aware. So, as a simple demonstration, let's start by creating a console application, which will be SharePoint list crawler. And a few things to notice here. We need to ensure that we are running our console application in a .NET Framework 3.5 mode. So let's select that one and let's create our project. The following step which we need to ensure is that we are compiling our code in x64 or any CPU format. So let's take properties of the project and let's have the build settings set up properly. By default, the platform target is x86, so let's change that to any CPU. 64-bit is also a valid option for this. Any CPU is totally fine as well. Since we are accessing information in a SharePoint, we need to add a reference to this particular project. And the assembly which we need to add is the Microsoft.SharePoint assembly. So let's move to the proper location. Like in the previous version, the Microsoft.SharePoint DLL is located in C program files, common files, Microsoft Shared, Web Server Extensions 14 and ISAP folder. This is the default location of all assemblies which we have in a SharePoint installation. And there's a lot of different assemblies available. In this case we are interested of the Microsoft.SharePoint.dll assembly. So let's make a reference to that one. Let's save the changes and let's add the additional code which is required to access the information. Since we are accessing the SharePoint information, we need to add the namespace, proper namespace for the SharePoint functionalities. And when that has been done, we are able to access the SP list and SP web objects, which will give us access to the SharePoint database. As you probably know, we are not allowed to access the SharePoint database using SQL or ADO.NET functionalities, and we should be always using the SharePoint APIs to access the information. So using SP site and connecting to the particular site collection, in this case we want to connect to http intranet.contoso.com. And from here we can take instance to the web, a root web of the site collection. So site.rootweb. So now we have accessed the root site of the particular site collection. Let's fix the code. So here we go, making the site SP site constructor properly. So now we have instance to the SP web, which is the root web of the particular site collection. And for example, in here, let's do for each SP site, SP list. So we're listing through the lists of the particular site collection, particular site. And in this case, since we are in console application and making this relatively simple functionality, let's write line where we are writing the list title to the console itself. So we're listing all of the lists which exist on the particular web. And just that we can actually see what we are doing, let's do the read key also to this console application so that we have a breakpoint available. So now that we start running the application, we can see that we are accessing the information on the particular site collection, and we are listing all of the lists available within the root web. As you can see from the end results, there's quite a few new lists available into 2010, which are created by default. And in 2007, there was only few lists available by default. So there's the list of the lists within the root web. One thing I wanted to show, which is quite common also when we are accessing or doing this console application, is that what happens if you actually forget to fix the build target. So quite often you accidentally set the platform target to x86 format, meaning basically 32-bit compilation. And this will actually result an exception in your code by stating that you're unable to access the site. And I wanted to show you this to the fact that you probably will run into this, and it might take a while to figure out what's wrong. So make sure that you have the proper build target set up. The other thing which I wanted to show you in this demo is the developer dashboard. So if we have a look on the intranet front page, we can see that it's a default team site intranet front page. There's nothing special in here. We are able to see basic functionalities. But if we want to see the additional developer dashboard information, we need to enable the developer dashboard. We can do this either by using PowerShell or STS ADM or running code. And I've already opened up a simple console application which will access these developer dashboard settings and set the developer dashboard level to on demand. We have off, on and on demand options available. If we set the option to on, the developer dashboard will be visible by default all the time. On demand basically means that we can from the UI show the developer dashboard if we want. So that's a proper option we want to do. And let's run our code. So we're enabling the developer dashboard in our farm, which is also a really important thing. Whenever we enable the developer dashboard, it will be enabled throughout the farm, not on particular site collection only. So you don't necessarily want to do this in a production form, but definitely as part of your development cycle or as part of your quality assurance, it's a good practice to make sure that your code is running properly. So now that we have enabled the developer dashboard, we can see a few changes within our sites. In a default master page, the developer dashboard, since we set the request on demand, it means that on the right corner, top right corner, we have this icon which we can click, and we can actually enable the developer dashboard to be visible. So if I now scroll down on the page, we can actually see additional information concerning the individual controls executed and which kind of database queries there is, and if there was any critical events, basically meaning exceptions and so on, those would be visible here as well. And the whole idea of the developer dashboard is that you're able to identify which areas of the page is taking long time to render, or is there any additional issues in your custom code. As part of the out-of-the-box functionalities, we can also include this debug information to our custom web parts. So we are able to write information to developer dashboard from our custom web parts as well. And since we are in on-demand functionality or on-demand mode, we can disable the developer dashboard so that the additional information is hidden.
This slide defines the overall picture of the SharePoint development platform and the different capabilities which we have. There's a lot of new and improved functionalities which are marked using different colors within the slides. There's of course a lot of general improvements, but let's concentrate on the actual new functionalities which are available. One of the nice things in 2010 is the fact that even though you could also use Silverlight already in 2007, it required additional configurations for the server and also for customizations when we are deploying them. SharePoint 2010 supports Silverlight development without any additional configurations, and with Visual Studio 2010 you can also easily debug your Silverlight applications running within the SharePoint context. The list view rendering technique has been also improved to provide more robust and flexible options for rendering information. One of the nice improvements also for the querying the lists is the introduction of Ling for SharePoint. You can really easily build up your queries using strongly typed objects, and you don't have to use a COML anymore if you don't like to use it. The COML interfaces, the XML-based query language interfaces, are still available, so your old code will work in 2010 as well. There's also an interface to access your list information using REST interfaces. The REST basically means that the list information is exposed within with using XML based on HTTP requests. Also, one of those kind of a remote functionalities is the client object model, which can be used to manipulate SharePoint information remotely. There's actually 3 different object models available for client object model: the .NET client object model, and Silverlight and JavaScript client object model. You can utilize these within your customizations to modify the site structure and behavior remotely, for example, from your Silverlight application. And as a final thing to cover, you can also link any LOB system to your SharePoint using familiar SharePoint look and feel. This is the external list functionality or concept which utilizes external content types, which basically define the interface to these external LOB systems and how the information should be handled. You can use external content types to manipulate information or even index the information for SharePoint search. In 2010, these external content types also support write-back to the LOB system itself, if the line of business system actually has interfaces for write-back. Let's continue by covering more detail to key improvements in the list level. Lists are the standard way of storing information in SharePoint as they were in 2007 as well. In 2010, we can define relationships between the lists with cascading or plug option. This means that we can create relationships which basically, within the relationship creation, we can ensure that when we are deleting information from the parent list, the sub or child items are deleted as well. If we use the plug option, it will mean that we are unable to delete the parent list item unless the child items have been deleted as well. We can also create validation formulas for item or list field level, which we can use to validate the user information which the end user is putting into the SharePoint list. We could create lookup columns already in the previous SharePoint 2007 version, but 2010 lookup can have projected fields, which are also shown within the list which have the lookup. In this way, you are not just limited to show single field text or items from another list, rather you can actually show additional fields from the lookup target as well. Obviously, the overall performance of the list have been also improved, and we can also define the limits of the list view query throttling. This means that if there's too many items queried from the list at once, either using custom code or views, the query will not be performed to avoid any issues within the performance. Obviously, all of the functionalities which we had in 2007 concerning the lists are still available in 2010 as well. Also, the rendering techniques for SharePoint lists have been updated. The lists are now rendered using XSLT, which provides more flexible customization capabilities for rendering for rendered information. This also means that we don't have to work with CAML in the rendering side of the list information. CAML itself is still used to define the list, but we don't need to use how the information we don't need to use the CAML to define how the information is actually rendered in detail. The XSLT list view web part provides also better performance for list information rendering and easier editing of the rendering rules using SharePoint Designer 2010. Since we are using XSLT, coding experience is simpler and we can use the standard language which is more easily adapted by developers. XSLT rendering is now the default rendering option for SharePoint lists and for external lists as well. On the data technology side, we also have new capabilities to increase the developers' productivity. Generally, the server object model and the data platform has been improved for better performance and to provide new capabilities like the improvements for the list management, which we actually covered already in the previous slide. The new functionalities, the other new functionalities in the data technology side includes the REST APIs, the client object model for remote access, and also the Ling access for manipulating the list data in server-side access or server-side code within your web parts. So Link to SharePoint is one of those really cool new capabilities. Previously, we were forced to write our data queries for SharePoint information using CAML. This was done by creating specific XML structures which queried the data from the SharePoint database. The challenge of the CAML queries is the fact that the queries themselves are not strongly typed, which increased the costs for testing the actual functionalities and made creating of the queries much more difficult. The Link to SharePoint provides us a way to write strongly typed queries against the SharePoint information. When we create our queries, we also have the intelligence available to see different options available. Link to SharePoint supports also list joins and projections. This means that you have a strongly typed access also to associated list information which you can use within your code. The example in the slide shows a relatively complex query where we have 3 different lists. the orders, customers, and city. Within the few lines of code, we are generating a query to request the orders where the associated customer has been associated to specific city. Writing a similar query in CAML would require additional time, and it would not be strongly tied. So you would be forced to check the actual field names from all of the lists. This really demonstrates the power of Ling to SharePoint. For remote access of the SharePoint information, we can now also utilize the new client object model. Client object model simplifies the process of accessing and managing the SharePoint information from remote applications. We actually have 3 different client object models available, as we mentioned in the previous slides, which were the .NET Client Object Model, Silverlight Client Object Model, and JavaScript Client Object Model. Previously, the only out-of-the-box option to access and manipulate SharePoint information remotely was to use the web services. This wasn't that difficult, but much more time-consuming compared to the client object model usage. Client object model provides a subset of the server object model functionalities. Despite the fact that it's a subset, it provides still a lot of the functionalities and capabilities to remotely modify the information within the SharePoint. We can manage, for example, sites, lists, users, web parts, and files remotely. All commands executed using the client object model are patched for performance. This will decrease the amount of information transferred between the client and server and make the overall usage faster. REST APIs provide strongly typed access to SharePoint list information using REST technologies. We can use the new WCF data services to access SharePoint list information remotely and to modify the information based on our requirements. Visual Studio 2010 provides easy-to-use designers and wizards to connect your remote application to SharePoint list information. So the development of the REST functionalities is relatively straightforward. One of the improved technologies in the SharePoint 2010 is the newly named Business Data Connections, which is now called Business Connectivity Services, as in BCS. It can be used to access line of business information from SharePoint. BCS provides abstraction layer to access any LOB system using either database connections, web services, WCF interfaces, or any custom .NET adapters. In SharePoint 2010 or in Visual Studio 2010, you can write your own .NET connector, which can be then used to integrate external information to SharePoint to provide consistent SharePoint user experience within the SharePoint farm. SharePoint 2010 supports not only reading the information from the external system, but also doing writebacks of the information. You can also interact with the external system using familiar SharePoint list user interface. This concept is called the external list. Note also that the same architecture can be used to integrate line of business application to SharePoint Search to provide indexing and indexing capabilities of any external information. Events have existed in the SharePoint since the previous versions as well, but there's new functionalities available. In Visual Studio 2010 SharePoint tools, there's dedicated project template available which provides wizards and automation for creating these events. This helps developers to create the necessary XML files which are required to register the code to SharePoint. We can configure also our synchronous list events to be executed not before the item has been created, rather immediately after the item has been created to the list. This way we can modify the list item information just before presenting it to the end user. There's also new site and list scope features like the web provisioning events, which are raised when the new sites are created either synchronously or asynchronously. We can also define a custom message page which is shown for end users if the user action has been cancelled. This helps to provide consistent user experience also for high-branded SharePoint sites. Like in other areas, there's also a lot of improvements in the workflow side. Workflows were already really popular in the previous versions, but now the capabilities and development experience have been improved. Depending on your requirements, you can create reusable workflows on Visual Studio or using SharePoint Designers 2010. The workflow development in SharePoint Designer can be workflows developed within the SharePoint Designer can be redeployed to any other SharePoint environment or imported to Visual Studio 2010 as the starting point of the advanced customizations. The SharePoint 2010 supports also not only list scope workflows, but you can also associate workflows to site level. Already in SharePoint 2007, you could have centralized services which are divided between multiple applications. These services were available using the shared service provider, which provided all-or-nothing association to numerous services to web applications. There was also no way to further extend these shared service functionalities or create your own custom services to be provided from the shared service provider itself. In SharePoint 2010, services can be managed individually. Each service can have their own customizations and administration options. Each of them can also be associated to any web applications more flexibly. The new service application model is built over WCF architecture, and it also provides capabilities to publish services between the fonts. Also, developers can take advantage of the same platform and develop custom service applications if required within your projects. Our custom service application can utilize a lot of the platform functionalities, so we can actually concentrate more on solving the business problems rather than creating the piping of our code. SharePoint user interface has been dramatically changed from the previous version, as we mentioned a few slides ago. The most visible change within the UI is the usage of ribbon to provide different functionalities available. As the developer, we can also further extend the ribbon functionalities by providing additional controls like buttons using custom actions. The other nice improvements are the user interface messaging APIs, which can be used to show any information for end user within the portal. These options are called the status bar and notifications, which have their own specific JavaScript APIs available for custom utilizations. We'll cover these topics more detailed in another module. The key object of the dialog framework design was to reduce the page transition times and to keep the user in context. This way, users don't get lost and know exactly where they are, despite the functionality they are actually performing. Basically, the contents of the dialog is loaded to an iframe inside of the floating div, which is shown for end users like in modal dialog, and the background is grayed out. This way, users have to perform the action shown within the dialog before they can move forward within the page. As a developer, you can also easily utilize the same framework within your customizations by using specific JavaScript APIs. These APIs provide you all you need interface to create similar user experience as the out-of-the-box functionalities. SharePoint 2010 now natively supports Silverlight as one of the UI options. There's numerous functionalities where Silverlight is used out of the box. You can also host really easily your own custom Silverlight applications using the out-of-the-box Silverlight web part. As we covered already a few slides ago, you can utilize the client object model within your Silverlight applications to easily access and manage SharePoint information. If you only need to access SharePoint list information, you can also use the REST APIs, which we covered a few slides ago as well. There has been also a lot of investments done for upgrade and packaging. Solution package, as in a WSP package, can now be considered as the standard installer for any customizations developed for the SharePoint. Solution package has also replaced the old STP file format, which was used when sites were saved as a template from UI. Now, if a site is saved as a template, solution package is actually generated, which can be then further deployed to any other SharePoint environment. If you are upgrading from 2007 version of the SharePoint, you can use the visual upgrade option to keep the user experience similar as it was in 2007 until the necessary changes for full 2010 version support has been done. This way you can upgrade your farm to new version faster and take advantage of the platform improvements, but keep the user experience as it was. Features, also the feature versioning has been improved. So the features support now versioning, which provides us capabilities to modify existing sites based on the changes done within the features. You can define different kind of actions to be done whenever a feature is upgraded. We can even write our own custom feature upgrade logic, which is automatically called or executed as part of the feature framework feature upgrade process, so that any existing sites can be modified based on the changes applied within the feature itself. SharePoint 2010 provides also improved instrumentation and monitoring capabilities for your customizations. You can use a lot of there's new out-of-the-box APIs for event logging and trace logging purposes. We also support creating own custom categories for logging, which can be then managed from the diagnostic logging user interface available from the central administration application. These functionalities are quite well demonstrated in the patterns and practices example code, which will be released as part of the examples provided by Microsoft. One of the topics we already covered in the previous slides was also the developer dashboard. When we are developing customizations for the SharePoint, we can also utilize this within our own code. We can use the SP Monitor Scope object to write performance information to developer dashboard itself. This enables us an easy way to monitor our web parts and functionalities performance, and we can identify more easily possible issues concerning the performance or something else within our customizations. Let's move on to following sections and concentrate on the improved tooling support, which is available in SharePoint 2010. As we have covered or discussed already, in Visual Studio 2010, the SharePoint is natively supported target for the code we are developing. There's also a lot of new designers available for customization creation, which will increase the productivity of the developers. Also, the packaging and deployment of the SharePoint project is natively supported, which means that we don't have to, as an end result of compiling our customizations, we actually get a solution package ready to be deployed to any SharePoint farm for testing or testing purposes or usage purposes. There's also numerous new project and item templates which will help the developers to develop required functionalities. If you have existing solution packages, you can import those to Visual Studio 2010 and continue development using the latest developer capabilities. The SharePoint tools in Visual Studio are also extensible, which means that we can extend the SharePoint support by providing additional extensions which can be used to help or further enhance the development experience. We'll cover the Visual Studio SharePoint tools more detailed in a separate module as well. SharePoint Designer has been dramatically improved to provide a better tooling for no-code solutions. SharePoint Designer is a free tool which can be used to edit or create SharePoint artifacts available within your environments. There are new and improved functionalities available to help to manage different aspects of your sites. One of the key improvements is also the capability that we can customize our SharePoint site using a SharePoint Designer, save the site as a template which generated the solution package as mentioned, and then we can take that package and import that to Visual Studio and start further enhanced customizations which we have been doing. Since the Visual Studio 2010 SharePoint tools are covered more detailed in a separate module, we'll concentrate in this demo to the new capabilities of SharePoint Designer 2010.
So in this demo we'll concentrate on a SharePoint Designer 2010 and what are the new capabilities and functionalities available. We have already created a theme site which we start customizing using the SharePoint Designer. So since we want to customize this particular site, we can start the SharePoint Designer directly from the site actions. And that will open up the SharePoint Designer and connect to that particular site automatically. And when the site has been opened, we are able to see the new user interface of the SharePoint Designer 2010. And the new user interface is much more clearer and much more intuitive than it was in 2007. And it concentrates more or less on the actual artifacts which we create on the site rather than the site structure. In 2007, the SharePoint Designer concentrated on the actual site structure or the hierarchy based on the URLs which are within or the virtual URLs within the site. So if we wanted to, for example, modify a master page, we had to go to the catalogs and master page URL and start modifying those master pages in here. And this basically required that the end users knew where the different assets and the artifacts are actually stored. We still have this all files view available, so you're able to crawl through the site also from the SharePoint Designer. But as an end user, it's much more efficient to utilize this left navigation, from where we can actually see different functionalities available and different artifacts. So there's different views for lists and libraries, workflows, site pages, site assets, and so on. By modifying, if we want to, for example, modify a master page, we can open up the V4 master, and we're able to see the particular master page's properties and settings. And if we want to start modifying the master page, we can easily do that also from the SharePoint Designer. Let's have an example. Also, one of the new functionalities or the capabilities is the ability to edit and create lists directly from the SharePoint Designer. So we can definitely create new lists if we want, or we can edit the existing lists directly from here. And we are able to, for example, assign new columns which will be visible within the list. We can create new columns and we can create new functionalities based on our business requirement, or we can add existing site columns to this particular list. And this will be much more easier way to edit and configure the sites. From the list summary settings, we can also really easily go and start editing the forms which are used for showing the list information. And we can also, for example, manipulate the workflows or the general settings of the site. If you, for example, want to change the display form rendering, we can open up the display form ASPX of the particular list, and after that we have a full view how it would actually look in the SharePoint site, and we're able to modify the web port functionalities and settings and the rendering instructions. In this case, we open up the announcement list's display form ASPX, and the SharePoint Designer is now contacting the particular list or contacting the particular ASPX page, and it will render the UI based on our settings. We have a similar functionality as we had in 2007, so we're able to see the site or the ASPX page either in code mode or in a split mode or only in a design mode. And from here we can, for example, relatively easily change the web port properties and web port functionalities. And we can modify different ways the functionalities are actually rendered. One of the really improved functionality in 2010 is the reusability of the workflows, and there's a lot of new functionalities available. One of the key improvements is the fact that we are able to actually take an existing approval out-of-the-box workflow and customize this workflow based on our business requirements. So we're able to have the out-of-the-box approval workflow as our starting point for actually making the functionality more or customize the functionality based on our exact requirements. And this was one of the things which was quite often required in 2007. So we're able to now start modifying and change the actual functionalities, change the completion conditions, change the behavior of a single task, and we're able to see the different kind of a business logic which is actually behind of the approval workflow. And we can freely edit these, and that would only affect on this particular site, unless we actually save the workflow as a reusable workflow, and then we can remove or take the workflow to another site as well. One of the obviously we can also really easily create new workflows. For example, if we want to create a workflow for the announcement list, we can just start the workflow creation from here, and we can easily use the designers. One of the new functionalities available is also the site workflow, which we can assign in a site level. So let's create this hello workflow, which will be a site workflow. So it's a workflow assigned to a site, not for any list. And in here, let's do something simple. So let's add a comment, or let's look to history list. And we can see also from the ribbon that we have quite a large set of different functionalities available. We're able to do conditions, we're able to define additional steps, and so on. In this case, let's do something relatively simple. So let's set the initialization form parameters, and let's add a new parameter called user name of the user using the site. And that will be a single line of text, initialization parameter. Let's move forward, no default value in our case, and OK. So it will be available for us also within the workflow. So now we can actually modify the message which we will use. And in this case, since it's a relatively simple hello world workflow, let's add a hello, and let's hook up or look up the actual initialization parameter from our settings. So based on the initialization of the workflow, we will have different messages coming up to the actual history log. Let's save the changes, and let's actually have a look on the workflow settings page. One thing I wanted to do here is to click the show workflow visualization on the status page, just to show you one of the nice functionalities as well. To get the functionality available, we need to publish the workflow. So let's click publish from the ribbon, and it will generate the necessary XMLs and information to the actual site, so the workflow will be available for usage. This will take a while, since its SharePoint Designer will contact the site and it will create the necessary files, and in this case, for example, creating the necessary files for visualization as well. I'll show what the visualization means actually during the workflow execution. And now when the actual workflow has been created, validated, and is available on the site, we can actually move on the site side and start using this site level workflow. So let's do it, for example, from here and preview in browser. So the SharePoint Designer will open up the particular site for us to use. We created a site level workflow using SharePoint Designer, which we can start, for example, from view all site content. We have the site workflows, and from here we can see that we have the hello VF available. So let's start a new workflow. Since we created the initialization parameters, there will be the form available, and we're able to use whatever the username in this case, or define the starting parameters of the workflow. Let's start the workflow, and it was relatively simple, straightforward workflow. It will log something to the history, so we're able to go to our completed workflows list, and we are able to see also the workflow visualization, since we actually selected the visualization to be generated automatically. And the key point also in here is the fact that we logged information concerning the actual text which was entered as an initialization parameter for the workflow start. For the visualization of the workflow will take a while, and the Visio services haven't been used in this exact environment quite a long time, so it took a while to open up. But the visualization basically means that the workflow will be presented using Visio services, and we are able to see which kind of tasks and steps of the workflows were actually executed. So if there would be dependencies or if clauses or different kind of forks within our workflow, we would be able to see which steps were actually executed as part of this particular workflow instance. In this case, the workflow visualization is relatively simple, as you can see. Coming back here, there's a lot of new functionalities available. There's a lot of new capabilities available. We're able to use, for example, reusable workflows, which basically means that we're able to create workflows in this environment, and we're able to take them from this particular environment to another environment, and they would still work, which was not possible actually in 2007. So reusability, and one of the also the things, improvements concerning the workflow is the fact that we're able to import these reusable workflows, which have been initially created in SharePoint Designer, to Visual Studio 2010 for further customizations.
In this section, we'll concentrate on the new scripting technology available also for SharePoint itself. The PowerShell, which is now available, can be used to modify and manage any SharePoint information using scripts. The syntax might be actually more familiar for developers, since we are accessing and manipulating actually objects using the object model of the SharePoint itself. PowerShell provides more advanced scripting environment than traditional command prompt. It allows IT professionals and developers to accelerate automation tasks. This is due to the fact that using a PowerShell is much more faster than the traditional scripting tools. PowerShell provides a single mindset for managing and automating of many systems, not just SharePoint. This means that if you understand the PowerShell scripting techniques or the commandlets which can be used, you easily can adapt and modify other environments as well. PowerShell is also an extensible framework which can be embedded inside of other applications, and you can also develop your own custom PowerShell snap-ins to streamline development and deployment. So how do we actually use PowerShell? It uses its own scripting syntax, which is however not SharePoint specific. So if you know how to write PowerShell scripts for any product, the syntax and formatting is the same despite the actual product you run, the product you write your scripts against you. The first example shows calling a commandlet that takes no parameters. This will result in a listing of available PowerShell providers within that particular environment. The second example is then filtering this command even more so that we are able to filter the end results of our execution. The third example adds formatting instructions so that we are showing the information in a separate way. And the last example redirects the output of the execution of the commandlets to a new text file. This could be, for example, useful when you want to collect information concerning your SharePoint deployment to be analyzed later on. SharePoint 2010 adds many commandlets for the SharePoint administrator or developers through a snapping provided as snapping. The name of the snapping is a Microsoft.SharePoint.PowerShell. The SharePoint commandlets cannot be called until the SharePoint snapping has been loaded. There are two common ways to load the SharePoint snapping. You can either call or execute the add.ps snapping commandlet and pass the parameter with a specific snapping name. Or you can start a PowerShell console using a start the SharePoint management console, which is basically a PowerShell console where the SharePoint commandlets have been loaded. The first picture on the slide shows the fact that unless we've uploaded the SharePoint snapping to our PowerShell sessions, we are obviously not able to call any SharePoint commands. If you're going to work with the SharePoint 2010 as a developer or as an administrator, you must learn the PowerShell from the perspective of someone that consumes the commandlets. However, in certain scenarios, you might also develop your own custom commandlets by creating your own custom PowerShell snapping. This approach allows you to develop in a richer environment like Visual Studio to build reusable components which encapsulates the logic of ongoing administrative tasks. SharePoint 2010 assemblies include base classes which you can use and inherit from, and this way you can concentrate only on the key business logic to be done. You can make your commandlets available by deploying the assembly, the global assembly GAG, and to load your assembly to PowerShell using the add.ps snapping command. Let's have a closer look on the PowerShell usage and how you can write your own custom commandlets.
In this demo, we'll concentrate on the PowerShell functionality, which is the new command line tool available in SharePoint 2010. So previously we used always the STS-ADM, which was kind of nice tool to automate any of our tasks to be done, also as a developer to our development environment. In 2010 we can use the PowerShell, which is much more efficient way of handling any of the tasks, since the actual commands are executed in a more faster way due to actual implementation of the PowerShell command line. And the PowerShell is basically a command line tool which we can use to execute different kind of commands which are available. The get process command, for example, is a command which is available to list the current commands of the Windows. And that's a good example of the PowerShell commandlets which are not SharePoint dependent, since the PowerShell is available also for other products as well. I open up already the PowerShell command line tool and the PowerShell command line tool is available for within the Windows, and there's few different options available. There's the Windows PowerShell and the Windows PowerShell ICE, which basically means the editing tool for PowerShell scripts. I'll show what's that all about also during this demo. And then there's different options for 86 and 64-bit environments. But the whole idea of the PowerShell is that we have a more powerful scripting environment. So we can, for example, list these different functionalities more efficiently. In a standard SharePoint installation, there's actually two different PowerShell commandlets or commands tools available. There's the out-of-the-box PowerShell, which is the Windows PowerShell, and then there's the separate SharePoint PowerShell window, which will automatically load the SharePoint commands to be available. So one of the SharePoint commands is get sp site, and since this PowerShell is not aware of these SharePoint commands yet, it's unable to execute this commandlet. To load the SharePoint commands to be available within this PowerShell window, we'll need to first load our SharePoint commands which are available from the global assembly CAG. So microsoft.sharepoint.powershell. And this DLL contains all of the SharePoint related PowerShell commands. So we can actually execute, for example, the get_sp site functionality, which is a good example of the PowerShell commandlets available for SharePoint manipulation. So now we're loading the assembly to the PowerShell instance, and the commands will be available right about now. So we can actually run the same get_sp site commandlet, which will actually list the different site collections which are available within the particular environment. So running the sp site, it will run the command within the Microsoft.SharePoint.PowerShell assembly. Now that we have loaded these site collection lists, we can start manipulating the actual result we're interested of. So if we are, for example, interested only on site collections which are in internet.contoso.com, we can filter our query based on, for example, the URL property which is now available. And we can use this $_ naming convention for the particular filter. So we're saying that the $_.url is like HTTP internet. And we're interested of all of those site collections where the URL is started using the HTTP intranet. If we want to have, for example, just the information concerning one particular site collection, we can also format the output of our command in a different way. So if we pipe the format list to our commands, we are able to see the actual properties of the particular object we are handling. And you can definitely see that actually we are handling the real SharePoint objects, which are in this case the sp site objects. So when we list these properties out, we are able to see those properties which are available for sp site. If we want, we can further modify our query to store this information, for example, in txt file. So it will be piped to txt file, or the end result will be available from there, which will basically mean that we are really easily able to take, for example, any information from one single environment, copy that to txt files, and take that information with us for further analysis. What else can we actually do as a developer? We can develop our own SharePoint commandlets. And SharePoint actually has a Within the Microsoft SharePoint PowerShell namespace, we have base classes to create these, for example, sp new commandlet functionalities, which basically means that there's base classes available to make the creation, for example, of the data objects as easy as possible. In this case, we are creating a new sp create contoso site commandlet, which will have a one parameter, which is a site name, and based on that information and one environmental variable, we are creating the new site collection using the blank site template to particular URL, which is given as a parameter. So we're able to actually, as a developer, to further enhance this commandlets which are available to automate, for example, the deployment of our solution packages or automate any settings within the environment. And this is really powerful way to further enhance our deployment and synchronization of the environments and so on. To start to get this assembly available within the PowerShell window, we need to first compile obviously the assembly, and after that we need to install that to global assembly GAG. And after that one has happened, we are able to load our assembly to be available within the window. So let's start or add the BS snap-in. So we're loading new commands available, and in this case it's ignite SharePoint PowerShell, which is the assembly which actually contains the information concerning particular custom commands. So we're now loading the assembly again to the memory, and then we can actually see that we have the sp create contoso site available. And this particular command took a one parameter in, so if we execute the command without giving the parameter, PowerShell will ask for the parameter, and let's name the site as ignite. And the commandlet will be executed. Our code within the commandlet which we just deployed and implemented in a Vesa Studio will be executed, which basically means that we are creating a new site collection underneath the internetcontoso.com sites. And in this case it was named as ignite. Let's check that the creation was really successful by opening up an IE. contoso.com/sites/ignite. So we're opening up an IE to this particular environment, and we can see that we actually used the parameters and created the site successfully. For debugging purposes, we can obviously also create scripts, which are PowerShell scripts, which we can execute by double-clicking or executing the files. And the script file ending will be the PS1. And for creating these, we can use this Windows PowerShell ISE, which basically is a development tool for scripts. And in here we can use debugging, we can use IntelliSense, there's color coding and so on. So the creation of the scripts will be much easier and faster. And just to demonstrate, for example, the debugging functionalities, let's add a breakpoint there by clicking the F5 from the debug. And we can actually start the actual execution of our script. And then we can use the F10 to move over the particular lines. So we're able to see the end result all the time from this area. And in this case, we are also loading up the Microsoft.SharePoint.PowerShell. So we're able to use, for example, the getSP feature, which we use to list different publishing features in this case. When the Microsoft SharePoint PowerShell snapping has been loaded, we can actually execute the getSP feature in a different formatting standard, and as an output we will see different kind of rendering again of the PowerShell list. And we were interested of the display name, ID and scope, so we're able to see that information as the end result. within our list or within our output window. So this is a really good tool of creating the PowerShell scripts and debugging the functionality.
As a final section within this module, we'll concentrate on the new claims-based authentication and especially on the details, what does it mean for developers. We'll have a kind of a short introduction on the key concept and extensibility options which the claims-based identity or the claims authentication model is bringing to us. So the authentication in SharePoint 2010 is based on a claims-based security model. The kind of old 2007 style authentication is still available, but that's considered as the legacy option. The objective of moving to claims-based identities is the fact that it decouples SharePoint from authentication provider. It also enables deployments where we can have multiple authentication providers for a single URL. We can also bypass the identity forward without using Kerberos delegation. This is especially important if you need to integrate some line of business systems to the SharePoint portal itself. From more IT pro point of view, claims-based authentication enables also easier federation between multiple organizations. Also, from the authoring point of view, we can configure access rights and permissions not just based on the identity information, but also based on the additional claim information. If, for example, all users in the portal have a claim that identifies their title, we could create authentication rules based on the fact that the user's title is project manager. And this obviously provides more flexibility of defining these authorization rules. There are two important scenarios for claims, the incoming and outgoing claims. Incoming claims is used to identify the user and solve the permissions within the SharePoint. The outgoing claims are important when we are accessing external information from SharePoint. This is when the user claims can be used to determine also the permissions within the external systems. Claims-based identity provides a common way for applications to acquire identity information from users inside the organizations, in other organizations, and in the Internet. Identity information is contained in a security token, often simply called as a token. A token contains one or more claims about the user. You can think of it as a metadata about the user that stays with the user throughout their session within the SharePoint. Claim-based authentication opens the door for great possibilities in SharePoint 2010. The greater flexibility for authenticating users against multiple repositories within the same web application, and more personalized experience based on the claim or information about the user provided within the token. With the claim-based authentication, we have some old and some new possibilities for developers. We can still manipulate the users, groups, and permissions in the same way. So basically, users are still SP user objects. So any code written to work with those will also work with claim-based authentication. The new development options include also writing a custom claims provider or identity transformation service. The claims provider means that we can extend the user token to have additional attributes, as in claims. These attributes can then be used to define, for example, the permissions to different objects within the SharePoint farm. Claims provider is association to SharePoint SharePoint token service, SharePoint security token service, and is called when the user is identified and additional claims should be available. So how do we actually develop these claims providers? Basically, the claims provider has two specific roles, which are augmentation and picking. In claims augmentation role, claims provider augments the user token with claims during the sign-in. Claims augmentation allows an application to augment additional claims in the user's token. For example, with the Windows-based login, the Active Directory service can augment all of the user's security groups in the user's Windows token. With claims-based login, customer relationship management application can augment roles from the CRM database. By having these claims in a user token, resources can be authorized against these claims, which means that these claims can be used to determine whether a particular user has access to specific resources. In claims picking role, the claims provider provides a listening, resolve, search, and friendly display of the claims functionality in the people picker. Claims picking allows applications to surface the claims in the people picker, for example, when configuring the security of the SharePoint site or SharePoint service. The claims picking functionality enables you to provide search and other functionalities for the identities which are provided. So that sums up our module. We covered the key new functionalities within or possibilities within the environments we can use for the SharePoint itself. We also covered the key different changes and capabilities for development within the SharePoint 2010 environments. There was also a few bit more IT Pro-oriented topics like the claims-based identity, but the aim was to introduce these topics and concentrate on developer aspects. Thanks for your time, and hopefully this presentation was useful.